The rain at Thomas Jenkins's funeral washed away nothing but the topsoil. When his daughter Sophia finally forced the rusted padlock off his forbidden backyard shed, she didn't find old lawn mowers or forgotten tools. She found a hollow floorboard, decades of encrypted bank ledgers, and a photograph of a family that wasn't hers. The graveyard in Bellingham, Washington, smelled of wet pine and turning earth. Sophia Jenkins stood beneath a black umbrella, watching the mahogany casket lower into the ground. At 32, she was an orphan. Her mother, Linda, had passed away from breast cancer a decade prior, and now her father, Thomas, was gone, taken by a sudden, massive coronary at the age of 68. Thomas Jenkins had never been a man of many words. He was a mechanic by trade, a man whose hands were permanently stained with motor oil and grease, his knuckles scarred from slipping wrenches. He ran Jenkins Auto on the outskirts of town, coming home every night at exactly 6 o'clock, eating his pot roast or meatloaf in silence, and retreating to the backyard. He was a provider, but he was not a father who offered warm hugs or sage advice. He existed in their home like a load-bearing pillar, essential, but cold to the touch. Beside Sophia stood her older brother, David. Where Sophia was quiet and introspective, working as a middle school history teacher, David was a loud, aggressive real estate agent in Seattle. He checked his gold wristwatch twice while Reverend Miller delivered the eulogy. For David, their father's death was a tragic inconvenience, a logistical hurdle of estate taxes and property sales that needed to be cleared before the end of the fiscal quarter. "Dust to dust," Reverend Miller intoned, closing his leather-bound Bible. Sophia threw a handful of wet dirt onto the casket. It landed with a dull, hollow thud that seemed to echo right through her ribs. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since she got the phone call from the hospital. Instead, she felt a strange, suffocating numbness, an impending sense that the foundation of her life had shifted in ways she couldn't yet see. 2 days later, the rain was still falling steadily when Sophia and David sat in the cramped, oak-paneled office of Arthur Pendleton, the family's long-time estate attorney. The office smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Arthur, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses perched precariously on his nose, cleared his throat and adjusted the manila folder on his desk. "Thomas was a pragmatic man," Arthur began, his voice raspy. "His will is straightforward, though there are a few highly specific stipulations he insisted upon updating just 3 months ago." David leaned forward, drumming his fingers on his knee. "Let's get to it, Arthur. I have a listing appointment at 4. Arthur shot David a mildly disapproving look before putting on his reading glasses. "The bulk of the estate, the family home on Elm Street, and the commercial property housing Jenkins Auto is left outright to you, David. The business accounts are to be liquidated and transferred to your name." David exhaled, a visible release of tension. "Okay. Good. The house needs a full gut renovation before I can put it on the market, but the lot value alone is solid." Sophia swallowed hard. She hadn't expected the house, but the sheer lack of equity distributed to her stung. "And me?" she asked quietly. Arthur turned a page. "To his daughter, Sophia Jenkins, Thomas leaves his personal savings account, currently holding a balance of $12,400. Arthur paused, looking up at Sophia with a sympathetic, almost confused expression. "He also leaves you something else. I will read this exactly as he dictated it." Arthur adjusted his glasses again. "To my daughter Sophia, I leave exclusive ownership, access, and rights to the contents of the detached corrugated iron shed located at the rear of the Elm Street property. David is expressly forbidden from entering the structure or laying claim to anything within it. Sophia alone must open it." Silence fell over the small office. The ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner suddenly sounded like a hammer against an anvil. "The shed?" David laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Are you kidding me? The old rusted piece of junk out back? Dad never let us near that thing. He said it was full of dangerous chemical solvents and old asbestos parts from the 70s. "I am only reading what is legally binding, David," Arthur said firmly. "The deed to the house is yours, but the shed and its contents belong to Sophia." Thomas was remarkably insistent on this point. He even had me draft a separate, notarized affidavit confirming this specific transfer. Sophia stared at the mahogany desk, her heart picking up a strange, arrhythmic beat. The shed. Since she was a child, the shed had been the ultimate forbidden zone. It sat at the very back of their half-acre lot, half swallowed by invasive blackberry brambles and shaded by a dying oak tree. It was padlocked year-round. Thomas only went inside late at night, and he always locked it immediately upon exiting. When she was 10, she had asked him what was inside, and he had looked at her with a chilling, dead-eyed seriousness she had never forgotten. "Things that belong in the dark, Sophia. Don't ever go near it." "Fine," David said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "She can have the shed. She has until the end of the month to clear it out, because I'm bringing a bulldozer in to level the whole backyard. Good seeing you, Arthur." After David left, Sophia lingered in the office. Arthur poured her a cup of water from a plastic pitcher. "Arthur," she said softly, taking the cup. "Did he say anything to you when he made this change?" The old lawyer sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Your father was terrified, Sophia. I've known Thomas for 30 years. He was tough as nails. But the day he came in to update this will, his hands were shaking. He kept looking out the window, watching the street. When I asked him why he was giving you the shed, he just said, 'It's the only way to keep her alive when the ghosts come to collect.'" A cold shiver raced down Sophia's spine. "Ghosts?" "That's what he said," Arthur replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Be careful, Sophia. Whatever he locked away in there. I don't think it's just old car parts." That evening, Sophia returned to the empty house on Elm Street. The silence of the old home was oppressive. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a footstep. The wind rattling the window panes felt like an urgent knock. She stood at the kitchen sink, a mug of untouched tea growing cold in her hands, and stared out the window into the backyard. The security light on the back porch cast long, skeletal shadows across the wet grass. At the far end of the lawn, the shed loomed. It was a 10 by 15-foot structure of corrugated sheet metal, rusted brown and oxidized green at the edges. Heavy ivy vines had crawled up the sides, as if the earth itself was trying to drag the building underground. "It's the only way to keep her alive." Arthur's words echoed in her mind. Her father was a mechanic, a blue-collar worker who drank cheap domestic beer and watched reruns of old westerns. He didn't have ghosts. He didn't have enemies. Driven by a sudden, restless anxiety, Sophia set her mug down. She walked into the attached garage and began rummaging through her father's meticulously organized tool chests. In the bottom drawer, she found what she was looking for: a heavy, 3-foot steel crowbar. She pulled on a yellow raincoat and stepped out into the stormy night. The rain instantly plastered her hair to her forehead. Her boots squelched in the mud as she crossed the yard. As she approached the shed, a foul odor hit her, a smell of decaying wet wood, old motor oil, and something sharply metallic, like old copper coins. The door was secured by a heavy-duty master lock, thick and rusted from years of Pacific Northwest rain. Sophia wedged the flat end of the crowbar into the U-shaped shackle. She braced her boots against the metal door, took a deep breath, and threw her entire body weight backward. The metal groaned. She adjusted her grip, her knuckles turning white, and yanked again with a desperate, guttural cry. With a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood, the rusted internal pins of the lock shattered. The heavy padlock fell into the mud at her feet. Sophia stood there for a moment, chest heaving, the rain washing the sweat from her face. She reached out with trembling fingers, unlatched the heavy iron hasp, and pulled the door open. Its hinges shrieked in protest. Sophia clicked on her heavy-duty flashlight and swept the beam into the pitch-black interior. Dust motes danced wildly in the light. She stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under her weight. The air was incredibly stale, thick with the smell of mildew. She swung the beam around, expecting, she didn't know what. A body? Stolen gold? Illegal weapons? Instead, she saw junk, piles of it. There was a rusted drill press in the corner, covered by a moth-eaten canvas tarp. Cardboard boxes, stacked haphazardly, bursting with old fan belts, spark plugs, and dry-rotted hoses. An old workbench sat against the back wall, littered with empty jars of screws and dried-up cans of WD-40. A wave of profound disappointment washed over her, followed quickly by anger. Her father had alienated her, terrified her as a child, and altered his will, all for a hoard of garbage? "You crazy old man," she whispered to the empty room, tears of frustration finally pricking her eyes. She walked over to the workbench, grabbing a rusted wrench off the top, ready to throw it through the window in a fit of rage. But as she leaned her weight against the heavy wooden bench, it shifted slightly. It didn't just slide on the floor, it moved on a pivot. Sophia frowned, shining her flashlight down at the floor. The workbench wasn't just sitting there. It was mounted on heavy steel casters that ran along a concealed track in the floorboards. Her heart hammered in her throat. She set the flashlight down, gripped the edge of the bench, and pushed with all her might. The heavy bench rolled smoothly to the right, revealing the wall behind it. Except it wasn't a wall. It was a heavy steel door set flush into the framing of the shed, complete with a digital keypad. The power to it was dead. Panic and adrenaline surged through her. She dropped to her knees. If the keypad was dead, how had her father accessed it? She examined the floorboards beneath where the bench had been. One of the planks had a small, recessed notch in the wood. She jammed the tip of the crowbar into the notch and pried upward. The floorboard popped free. Beneath it was a small, hollow cavity lined with plastic. Inside lay an old-fashioned brass key and a thick, leather-bound ledger. Sophia snatched the key, inserted it into a manual override slot hidden beneath the dead keypad, and turned. A heavy deadbolt clunked loudly. She pulled the steel door open. Behind it was a small, reinforced panic room, no larger than a closet. She grabbed her flashlight and illuminated the space. There were no car parts here. Mounted on the walls were racks of high-end tactical firearms, rifles and handguns perfectly oiled and maintained. Below them sat a large, open-floor safe. Sophia fell to her knees in front of the safe, her hands shaking so violently she dropped the flashlight. It rolled, casting wild shadows on the walls. Inside the safe were stacks of $100 bills, bound in rubber bands, easily hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the money wasn't what made Sophia stop breathing. Beside the cash was a stack of manila envelopes. She pulled the first one out and opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Name: Chloe Evelyn Croft. Date of birth: October 14th, 1990. Mother: Victoria Croft. Father: Thomas Jenkins. Sophia stared at the date. October 14th, 1990. That was her exact birthday. She frantically pulled out the next envelope. Photographs spilled onto the floor. She picked one up. It showed her father, looking perhaps 30 years old, his face unlined, his eyes bright, standing on a sunny beach. He had his arm wrapped lovingly around a stunning blonde woman, and in his arms he was holding a baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket. Sophia flipped the photo over. Written in her father's unmistakable scrawl was, "Victoria and Chloe, San Diego, 1991, the day before we ran." "No," Sophia whispered, the word catching in her throat. She dug deeper into the safe and pulled out the leather ledger she had found under the floorboard. She flipped it open. It wasn't a bank ledger. It was a meticulously detailed diary. The last entry was dated 2 days before he died. They found me. I saw a black sedan watching the shop yesterday. I saw the man inside. It was Silas. After 32 years, the Chicago syndicate finally tracked me down. They don't know about Sophia. They think she's David and Linda's biological kid. They don't know she is Chloe. I have to make sure they never find out. If I die, Silas stops looking. I have to protect my little girl. I took the pills tonight. I'm sorry, Sophia. Trust no one, especially not David. He knows more than he claims, and his debts are catching up to him. Sophia sat frozen on the damp floor of the hidden room, the ledger slipping from her numb fingers. Her father hadn't died of a random heart attack. He had killed himself to protect her. And she wasn't Sophia Jenkins. She was Chloe Croft, the daughter of a woman she had never met, hiding from a crime syndicate she knew nothing about. Suddenly, over the drumming of the rain on the metal roof, Sophia heard the distinct crunch of tires on the gravel driveway outside. Then, the heavy slam of a car door. "Sophia!" a voice called out from the dark yard. It was David. "Sophia, are you out here? I saw the lock was broken." Sophia killed the heavy-duty flashlight instantly, plunging the hidden panic room into suffocating darkness. She scrambled backward, her rain boots slipping on the slick plastic floor until her spine hit the cold steel of the gun rack. She held her breath. Her lungs burned with the effort, her pulse hammering in her ears like a snare drum. Through the thick steel door, the sounds of the shed were muffled but distinct. Heavy footsteps crunched over the scattered car parts. "Sophia?" David's voice was tighter now, laced with an irritation that masked a deeper panic. "I saw your Subaru in the driveway. Don't play games. I told you this place was dangerous." Sophia clamped a hand over her mouth. Her eyes adjusted to the pitch black, tracking the faint, ambient grey light bleeding in through the partially open steel door. She watched the beam of David's phone flashlight slice through the dusty air of the main shed. Then she heard him muttering. Not to her. He was on a phone call. "I'm looking right now," David hissed, his polished real estate agent voice entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, reedy tremor. "The padlock is busted. The door is wide open. No, Silas, listen to me. I didn't know the old man actually put her in the will for the shed. I thought he was just being a paranoid old fool." Silas, the name from the ledger, hit Sophia like a physical blow. The Chicago syndicate, her father's killer, or the man who drove her father to take his own life, and her brother was on a first-name basis with him. "I have the property rights," David argued with the phone, his footsteps pacing back and forth just on the other side of the workbench. "You'll get your money. The Capitol Hill development went belly up, but the equity in this land alone covers my debt to the O'Bannon family. Just give me 48 hours to bulldoze this junk and find whatever he hid." Sophia's hands groped blindly in the dark behind her. Her fingers brushed against cold, oiled metal, a heavy, semi-automatic handgun. She wrapped her fingers around the textured grip, pulling it from the magnetic rack. Her father had taught her to shoot a .22 rifle at paper targets when she was 14. He had framed it as basic self-reliance, but now she understood it was survival training. She checked the weight of the gun. It was fully loaded. "Wait," David said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The pacing stopped. The workbench. It's moved. The beam of his flashlight hit the steel door. David stepped into the threshold of the panic room, illuminating the open floor safe, the scattered $100 bills, and finally, Sophia. He froze. His phone slipped slightly in his grip. He looked at the cash, then at the birth certificate on the floor, and finally at the gun leveled squarely at his chest. "Sophia," he breathed, raising his free hand slowly. "Put that down. You don't know what you're holding." "I know exactly what I'm holding, David," she said, her voice eerily calm. The shaking had stopped. A cold, absolute clarity had taken over. "Who is Silas?" David swallowed hard. He's a private investor, a guy I owe some money to. It's a misunderstanding." "Don't lie to me," she shouted, the sound reverberating off the metal walls. "I read the ledger. He's from Chicago. He's the reason Dad is dead. Did you tell him where to find us?" David's face crumbled, the arrogant facade melting away to reveal a terrified, indebted man. "I didn't have a choice, Sophia. I was $3 million in the hole on a bad commercial flip. The O'Bannon crew bought my debt. They were going to break my legs." Then Silas saw a picture of Dad on my desk. He recognized him. He said Dad stole $2 million and a book of encrypted blackmail from them back in 1990. He said if I gave him Dad, my debt was cleared. "He was your father," Sophia whispered, disgusted. "He wasn't my father," David snapped back, pointing a trembling finger at the manila envelopes on the floor. "And he wasn't yours either. At least, not the way you think. I found Mum's journals years ago. Mum and Dad couldn't have kids. They adopted me. But you, Dad brought you home in the middle of the night in 1991. Just showed up with a baby and a duffel bag of cash and told Mum they had to move to Washington. He ruined our lives to hide you." Sophia stepped forward into the light, keeping the gun steady. "Turn around. Put your hands on the wall." "Sophia, please." "Do it, David." He turned. Sophia grabbed a thick plastic zip tie from the top of the open safe. With ruthless efficiency, she kicked the back of his knees, forcing him to the floor, and bound his wrists tight behind his back. He cursed, struggling against the plastic, but she pulled it until it bit into his skin. She grabbed her father's waterproof canvas duffel bag from the corner of the room. Moving with mechanical precision, she began shoving the stacks of cash into the bag. She added the ledger, the birth certificate, the photographs, and 2 extra magazines of ammunition. "Silas is in Seattle," David wheezed from the floor. "He's driving up tonight. He's going to kill you, Sophia. He doesn't just want the money, he wants the bloodline erased. Victoria Croft stole from the syndicate, and Dad helped her. Silas won't stop until you're dead." Sophia zipped the heavy duffel bag shut. She slung it over her shoulder and looked down at the man she had called her brother for 32 years. "My name," she said coldly, "is Chloe." The rain had intensified into a torrential downpour by the time Sophia stepped out of the shed. She locked the heavy steel door of the panic room, leaving David bound in the dark. He would be fine for a few hours. Long enough for her to do what needed to be done. She didn't run to her Subaru. Instead, she walked to the rusted drill press in the corner of the main shed. Beneath the moth-eaten canvas tarp, she found what she had subconsciously noticed earlier: 3 red plastic jerry cans of high-octane racing fuel her father used for his custom rebuilds. Thomas Jenkins had left her the shed because it was the only safe place. but it was also a tomb of evidence that could be used to track her. She unscrewed the caps. The sharp, noxious fumes burned her nostrils. She splashed the fuel over the cardboard boxes, the wooden floorboards, and the walls of the shed, deliberately avoiding the reinforced walls of the panic room where David was held. She poured a thick trail out the front door and onto the muddy grass. She pulled her father's brass Zippo lighter from her raincoat pocket, a token she had taken from his bedside table the day he died. She struck the flint. The flame danced, fragile and bright against the storm. She tossed it onto the soaked grass. Whoosh! A wall of blue and orange fire erupted instantly, eating its way up the side of the corrugated metal building. The heat was immense, pushing the freezing rain away in a cloud of hissing steam. Within seconds, the interior of the shed was an inferno, consuming the old car parts, the rusted tools, and every trace of Thomas Jenkins' quiet, paranoid life. The fire department would arrive in 10 minutes. They would find David safe in the fireproof panic room, but the shed and the illusion of Sophia Jenkins would be nothing but ash. She walked backward into the shadows, letting the darkness of the trees swallow her. 3 hours later, a woman with dyed jet-black hair and a dark trench coat walked into the Greyhound station in downtown Bellingham. She carried a single heavy canvas duffel bag. She purchased a ticket using cash, bound for San Diego, California. Sitting in the dim light of the bus terminal, Sophia, now Chloe, pulled the photograph from her pocket. She traced the face of the stunning blonde woman, Victoria Croft, the mother she never knew, the woman who had run from the Chicago mob, leaving her daughter in the protective, calloused hands of a mechanic who had sacrificed his life to keep her a ghost. She opened the ledger to the final page. Beneath her father's suicide note, pressed into the binding, was a single laminated business card. Victoria Croft, Boutique Antiquities, San Diego. Phone 619-55-50198. It wasn't a dead end. It was a map. Thomas hadn't just given her money and weapons. He had given her the ultimate choice, to hide or to fight back. As the bus pulled out of the station, rolling south onto the dark, rain-slicked highway, Chloe watched the taillights of passing cars blur in the window. The girl who had stood terrified in a graveyard days ago was gone. In her place was a woman with $250,000, a loaded gun, and a burning desire to introduce Silas to the ghosts he had created. The discovery in the shed destroyed the foundation of Sophia's world, only to replace it with the dangerous, high-stakes reality of Chloe Croft. Thomas Jenkins was not a cold father, but a fiercely loyal protector who gave everything to keep her hidden. Armed with the truth, her father's ledger, and a new identity, Chloe walked away from her fabricated life, ready to finally confront her dangerous legacy.